Welcome to another video, friends. So today we are going to talk about the AWS S3 storage tiers. When we talk about S3, the way the data gets stored can vary across depending on what is the requirement we have, what is the retention we want to have with the data, how frequently the data needs to be accessed, and there are some other parameters. So that's what we are going to look into today. So the very standard thing is the general purpose S3 standard, which is the Amazon S3 standard general purpose tier, where the data that we are looking to store will be accessed frequently, and it's basically the default, you can say it's the default option for storing the data in S3. The second option is infrequent access IA, which is slightly cheaper than the general purpose access, and it is useful if the data is not accessed that frequently, and we are okay with data being the response to the data being a little slow as compared to general purpose. Now there is another variation in this, which is the one zone infrequent access. In this there is an additional cost benefit when compared to infrequent access, with a trade-off of availability. So it is slightly diluted in terms of availability, but the advantage it gives over the regular infrequent access is on the cost. So basically, one zone infrequent access is where our data is only available in one availability zone. Availability zone is kind of when in terms of S3, it is like a disaster, or basically a DR, disaster recovery management kind of setup, where different availability zones can host the data, and the more distributed the data will be, the higher will be the availability. So here we only focus, or we only have the data stored in one zone, which of course adds to the risk that the data might get lost, but at the same time gives us a cost advantage. Then there is something new that has been introduced, which is intelligent tiering, where we leave it to Amazon to decide where to put data in order to save cost. And then finally there is something called Amazon Glacier, which is a very useful way to store the data, especially if we are looking just to archive the data, and it's very cheap. But we have to be in mind that accessing the data here is not that the response that we get to access the data will be the slowest when it comes to Glacier. So again, this table basically explains more details when we move from the left side of the spectrum to the right side. We move from a very high availability of data, frequently accessed data scenario, to something which is towards the archival of the data. So as you can see here, the standard storage or the general purpose storage is the one which gives us which is the best when we are looking for frequently accessing the data, whereas Glacier is the one where accessing the data might be slow, and it is useful only to archive the data, and everything else falls in between. And each of them have a different availability ratio when we talk about the trade-off that we are doing. But of course, when we move from left to right side, we are saving on cost with the trade-off of availability. So from the examination point of view, I think the key thing is to understand standard versus Glacier. And there is no need to actually memorize or have a kind of precision over your basically have a precise understanding of these availability percentages and all. It's just for depicting the kind of transition we have to do from left to right. So that's about it. Now there is another thing called S3 lifecycle rules. So lifecycle rules are basically we can consider them as a set of rules that help us to save cost by moving the data between the different tiers that we just saw. For example, we can set up in AWS, we can set up for a particular object, or basically for a particular bucket in AWS, we can set up that the entire content of the bucket should move from GP or general purpose to infrequent access IA after a certain period of time, or eventually can also move to Glacier after a certain period of time. Now there are something called transition actions, where we define a rule which indicates after how many days an object from GP should move to IA post creation, and after how many days, similarly as an example, after how many days an object should move from IA to Glacier post creation. Similarly, there is also something called expiration actions, where we can define a rule which basically indicates after how many days the object should expire, or we should lose the content, or we should basically discard or delete the content. This is really useful in a scenario where, let's say, we are storing log files. So we can specify a period of time after which we don't need the log files, and we can ask S3 to automatically delete those files to save cost. So this is the overall idea of lifecycle rules. Now we can quickly take a look at these things. I mean, in an S3 console, AWS AWS console, we can take a look at these attributes that we just discussed. So I have a sample file here which is present in one of my buckets here, and when I click on this sample file, so what I see here under the first thing basically we'll be looking at is the storage class. That is what we saw, so which is nothing but the tier. So if you see here, by default the storage class is standard. If we can edit and check the different storage classes available, so we can move from a standard frequently accessed class to anything else based on our need. And of course the pricing, because pricing is the key thing that will change and where we'll effectively save costs. So each of these different storage classes or tiers will have a different set of pricing, and depending on our use case we can choose any one of these. So I'm not going to do it right now because I'm not in the free tier anymore. So yeah, just to demonstrate, this is where you can actually come and choose the kind of storage class that you need for your object. Now the second thing that we saw, the lifecycle rules, etc., that applies at the bucket level. So if you go to the bucket, and in the bucket, if you see here, there is a tab called management, and in this management tab we have this lifecycle rules. So what we can do is we can create lifecycle rules depending on our use case, and I can just I'll just create a sample rule. So I'm just typing something gibberish, and so yeah, so we can I'll just show the options here. So basically, for any given rule, what we can do is we can also put a filter which would indicate the rule will only apply to a certain set of objects which basically are a part of the filter. For example, we can limit it to apply only to certain files which have a prefix of, let's say, QWERTY. So any file which has a prefix of this will this rule will only apply to that. And then the important thing is here, what rule or action we want to do. So for example, here we can choose, okay, the current version of object should be transitioned from one class to another class. So storage class transition will be from standard to IA, and we can specify that, for example, after 60 days you move your files from standard to IA. Similarly, we can also add new transition where we say, okay, from IA or from we can from this, after this IA transition, we can also say that after a period of time, let's say after 6 months, so 180 days, you can move your object from standard to Glacier, or after moving it to IA after 60 days, another 120 days it should move to Glacier, like that. So we can do all these transition based settings under AWS, and then accordingly our objects will be moved. So I am not going to create it right now. I just wanted to demonstrate where we can do all these changes that we just discussed. So I think that's it for this video. So I hope you would have got some understanding, and I hope this will help. I'll continue creating these short videos as and when I'll be preparing for my own certification, and I hope this might help somebody else who is also going along and trying to get certified on the AWS machine learning specialty exam. So thanks a lot for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.